For today's album review, we have Distance Over Time from Dream Theater because I've already reviewed some Dream Theater albums, so I might as well just try to actually do them all. Sporadically, I'm not going to do them all in a row. And today I decided to go over, Distance Over Time, which is a pretty clever title. Let's give it that. I think that I've already mentioned it before, but I think Dream Theater has very creative titles. The titles always sound very cool and like not edgy, but like they sound very epic, very grandstanding in a way. But yeah, for a Dream Theater album, I would say it was a bit disappointing coming from previous albums, since it doesn't have as much of the typical composition of Dream Theater, which is mostly atmosphere and time. Like Dream Theater gives a lot of time to their songs, gives a lot of time to build things up and whatnot. This is definitely way more vanilla prog, I would say, than Dream Theater prog. However, while I was disappointed when it came out, I think that with time this album actually aged quite well, I would say. I did listen to Stratovarius a few days ago, and when I talked about these sounds being very similar but used in ways I hadn't seen before, I hadn't heard before, this is kind of what I meant. Dream Theater kind of, in a way, in this album, did a kind of quote-unquote power metal album, but in a Dream Theater way, with a Dream Theater sound style, right? Which was very interesting to listen to, and it was definitely very fun. It definitely had that signature Dream Theater with, especially guitars, keyboards going on. It was definitely it felt more technical in that regard, because it did really feel like, what if Stratovarius was played by Dream Theater, right? That's sort of like the vibe that I got from this album now, because when the album came out, the album just felt very bland to me. It felt like, who cares about it type thing, especially because it wasn't exactly what I was imagining or what I was expecting from the album. So it is definitely an interesting album to listen to. I think again, the album actually aged way better. I think that when it came out, people, first of all, this came out after The Astonishing, which was already disappointing for a lot of people. But even before The Astonishing, you had all of those great albums, and then all of a sudden these two albums kind of changed what Dream Theater was doing and what they were going for. So in that regard, it did feel a bit disappointing, but I think that with time, this album definitely gained a lot of the, yeah, sure, it is different, but it still retains a lot of the Dream Theater style. It's very technical, and it's very fun to listen to. I think that's one of the most underrated aspects of the album, is how fun it is to listen to. And in that regard, it definitely feels more old school in that aspect. It brings me more the vibes of older songs like Metropolis or Images and Words, but with a more modern sound, right, with a more technical sound. But essentially it's basically a bit less focused atmosphere, I would say, and much more focused on having fun playing the songs and just having songs to play, I would say. They, at least from my perspective, the album felt a lot of, let's just do these songs because they're kind of fun to do, and, they're fun to play more than anything. Because I think that's one of the highlights, I think, of the album, is that it sounds fun to just play, right? I don't play instruments, but it sounds fun to play for a musician type thing, right? It's I don't know, so there are bands and there are songs that it just sound fun to play, and I think that this album is sort of more on that regard rather than on the regard of being really cool to listen to or whatever, right? So yes, in that regard, I think that this album is definitely not what you would expect from Dream Theater, but at the same time, I think that's completely fine. As again, as I've said, I will repeat this again because I think it's a very important point. When this album came out, it was pretty disappointing. It was very average, and compared to The Astonishing, for example, whereas The Astonishing was disappointing, but at least it tried to do something different. It was a concept album and everything. This album just felt very vanilla. It felt very mediocre, very flat. It felt very flat to people, it kind of spelled, I guess, the beginning of the end, if you will, for Dream Theater. But again, with time, and I think that after other albums that I've put out and everything, I think that honestly this album aged quite well. I do think that, I listened to this album on the buzz when it first came out, because it was just wait, what, Dream Theater have a new album? Oh, okay, let's see what it's all about. And I wasn't terribly impressed, but I also wasn't really all disappointed, I guess. But nowadays, listening to it, I can appreciate how different it is from other Dream Theater albums. Again, yes, sure, it does fall a bit more flat because we're talking about Dream Theater, and a lot of the albums are so high bar to clear type thing. Like at this point, Dream Theater have what, like 14 studio albums or some shit like that. Like, obviously not every album is going to be absolute masterpiece that's going to blow you out of the water type thing, right? And yeah, I do think that, they do need albums where they have more fun just playing and they're just regular songs rather than the prog, songs that, when I say prog, I mean more focusing on the narrative and the atmosphere of the album and everything, and doing something that is interesting as opposed of, oh yeah, look, we can play instruments and we're super complex at it, right? Because prog technically can be seen as super complex structures and playing and whatnot. But yeah, personally, I honestly enjoyed it more than I was expecting. I haven't heard it pretty much since it came out. It came out in what, 2017, 18, maybe. I don't know. I know it's been a few years, and I was just like, okay. I was kind of disappointed back then. I hadn't listened to it until now, and now I listened to it, and I was like, actually, you know what? It's pretty fun. It sounds pretty fun. Again, sure, compared to what Dream Theater have done, it's flat. It's not as super impressive or anything like that. But I also think you can't say it's bad, because it's definitely not bad. Yeah. But as for my vibe meter, I'm feeling a 6 out of 10. Let's go with a 6 out of 10. I think it's nice. It's not a bad album. It's not amazing or anything. It's nice. It's a nice thing for you to listen to, and I can see why people, looking back especially, can look at this album with so much interest or with so much passion and love for it. Definitely, because I didn't understand why people were so passionate about this album, and I was like, it's kind of an album that felt flat, but listening to it now, I can understand why people, not my favorite, but I can understand why people love it.